unite conservatives, right? You don't get to bring together Protestants, Catholics, traditionalists, conservatives, right-wingers around an issue of we need to restore tax-exempt status to racially segregated private schools, right? That's a loser. But attitudes towards abortion basically reflect attitudes towards race. So whites who score high on racial resentment and racial grievance, they're far more likely to support strict limits on abortion than whites who score low on those measures. So racial attitudes are linked to a whole wide of disparate issues, including social welfare spending, gun control, immigration, climate change. And so abortion in and of itself is of very little significance to Christianity and anything inherent in conservatism, but it is a powerful proxy for stay out of my backyard, states' rights, and it's really a powerful proxy for race. And white people would never rally around on explicitly a racial platform, but they will rally around on issues that are proxies for race, and abortion is essentially a proxy for race. People who are strongly opposed to abortion tend to be strongly opposed to affirmative action, to massive social welfare spending. They tend to be massively opposed to relaxing criminal enforcement. They tend to be for very strong law enforcement, for long prison sentences for people who commit dangerous crimes. And so these are proxies for issues that tend to unite Republicans.
Quite a few things. First and foremost, it's unlikely that the law in Texas will come to Florida. Somebody has filed a bill which is actually a watered down version of the Texas bill in the legislature, but it's even DeSantis and the Republican leadership in the legislature have not endorsed the bill. They just made some noises about being pro-life. Typically what happens, I know the Florida Republican Party very well and how it operates. What it does is it avoids these hot button social issues, and if it addresses them at all, it's in a very sort of backdoor, moderate sounding way. For instance, DeSantis signed a bill a few years ago which mandates parental notification for abortion, but it includes a judicial bypass option. So really anybody you would just go get the judicial bypass, and the parental consent goes out the window. So I mean, it's a toothless act. But talking about what the Florida Republicans will do, I find it very unlikely that this bill will pass the Florida legislature. It'll probably die in committee in at least the House or the Senate. It might get through one committee in one of these chambers, but it being signed by DeSantis is unlikely. He has asked the state legislature not to bring any controversial bills to his desk in an election year, and he did so for obvious reasons. And now looking at the popularity of this thing, I'm not big on public polling, as everybody knows. I think a lot of it is garbage, but I don't deny something when it's very obvious. And there is an obvious trend which shows that most Americans dislike the sort of abortion law that was passed in Texas, specifically one that does not allow any exemptions for the victims of rape or incest. So I think that quite clearly this is a very unpopular bill. Even many Republicans dislike it, but it certainly was done because the Texas Republicans thought they would get something out of it in terms of political benefit. I'm just not quite sure what that is, but I cannot imagine this bill being very popular in the long run. As a matter of fact, if you follow this sort of thing, and I think Luke probably does more than I do, which is to say that if you care about it, Abbott's approval rating has gone down massively in Texas since this thing was brought into power. And obviously that means he's losing support among people who voted for him. But so I think that the popularity of the Texas law is quite marginal. And I think that it's the likelihood of it being replicated in other large states is also quite low. But beyond that, looking at abortion, if people, abortion is what keeps the Republican Party in office, or at least it's what keeps it viable. Because the people who get abortions are disproportionately from the left. They're socially and economically downscale. They're people who tend to not have a lot of long-term planning, although that's not absolutely the case, obviously. And the people who get abortions typically get pregnant because they don't take proper steps to avoid becoming pregnant in the first place. And so it attracts a certain sort of person who's very likely to vote for the left, who's very likely to want instant gratification, which makes them even more likely to vote for the left beyond general principle. And it also attracts a sort of person who's not very much into personal responsibility, or else once again they would have taken a precaution ahead of time. Now, of course, there are cases where birth control or prophylactics don't work, but those are, they are there, but they're quite marginal in reference to the overall situation where people just don't take proper precautions precautions ahead of time, or they don't get tubal ligations or vasectomies. So I think that there's no question that abortion demographically is good for the right and bad for the left. And so for people on the right who are enamored of anti-abortion politics, they're really advocating for something that will destroy their power within the electorate. Because if there is no abortion and everyone has kids who would have had an abortion, then the left is going to have a supercharged demographic majority within a generation's time, and the right is going to get swamped. So I don't know how it makes sense for anyone on the right who's concerned with demographics to be anti-abortion. That's actually a total self-own. By the way, it's also a self-own for the left to be pro-choice, because they are ensuring that their demographic power is not as great as it would otherwise be.
Yeah, there's a good point. So there's a big difference between conservatism and, say, the distant right on this issue. The distant right understands that abortion is overwhelmingly eugenic, that it's the less intelligent people who are the most likely to have unwanted pregnancies. So there's definitely a eugenic angle, but I don't see any way how this plays out in Republicans' long-term favor, and yet this issue does have a strange hypnotic effect on people who have some traditional tendencies. So I view all abortion as killing, but I don't view it as murder. So that is the traditional Jewish perspective. Yes, it's killing, but it's not murder. It's not the equivalent of taking the life of someone who's born. So I view the overwhelming number of abortions as immoral. And so if this could perhaps prompt a change in attitudes towards sexuality, that it's not quite as recreational an activity as people may want it to be, if this prompts a little bit more soul searching, then obviously those would be good consequences. I'm having a hard time. I can't see how this Texas law leads to positive results for Republicans down the road, because I have never been able to resonate with the fervor of the anti-abortion cause, even though I morally share the fervor. I do think the overwhelming majority of abortions are murder and are killing, but it has a hypnotic effect on people, which is a little bit beyond my ken. On the other hand, I remember I met this very nice girl, very lovely girl, who had a party after her abortion, and that attitude is even more foreign to me. That's even more appalling to me. That's even more hideous to me. That you would throw a party after having an abortion, that you would celebrate having an abortion, or as some leftist women that I've dated have said, well, abortion is just something that women go through. That cavalier attitude to killing appalls me.